Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today is the last session of our internship program, and we're delighted to have two people from two different countries. One is Dr. Klaus Schuster. He's the founder and CEO of Healthcare Planning Switzerland, based out of Vienna, Austria. He's also the member executive board of WEMED AG and speaker of the executive board of WEMED. Dr. Schuster, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Then we have Dr. Murtaza Qasuri. He's the vice president, Zulik Pharma Singapore, and head of medical affairs Asia. They both are brilliant doctors and experts in their fields, and when I talked to them about our internship program, they were delighted to be a part of it by saying that we want to get into the minds of our architecture interns, 14, 16 that we have here from all three different schools, and they've really put together some great presentation. I couldn't show it to you before because it would have taken the charm out of it, but it's just brilliant. And so welcome on board to our internship program, Dr. Schuster, Dr. Murtaza, and we'll just give the mic to you. You can start off any time. Let me just quickly introduce our interns to you. I hope you can see all of them.
Yes, we can. So I can.
All right. So this program is being recorded and will be put on different media for posterity and other people to look at and learn from. And these interns will have promised me to take this knowledge back to their schools and to their friends and spread it and multiply it and build upon it. So thank you for sharing your knowledge and the hard work that you've put in for this presentation. Please start off anytime.
Thank you very much, and a very warm welcome from my side. So, and also thank you very much for this very warm introduction. It's really a pleasure having this presentation together with my dear friend, Dr. Murtaza Qasuri. And I think I can speak for both of us that we are really delighted having this presentation and talking about healing architecture, because hopefully also with these slides and with this information, we can convey the message that there are so many different ways to care for patients, but also for related staff and relatives, that I think also talking about the architectural aspects of healthcare facilities is something which hopefully is relevant for you, but also for your future studies and work. And with that, let me start to introduce my fellow speaker, so Dr. Murtaza Qasuri. He is able to speak your language. I'm not. I'm so sorry. So I can only do it in English. I know Dr. Murtaza now for quite some years. So Dr. Murtaza, as already mentioned, is Vice President in Asia for Medical Affairs for Zulik Therapeutics, which is a pharmaceutical division of Zulik Pharma. And it's one of Asia's leading healthcare solution companies with an annual revenue of USD 16 billion and offering a broad range of healthcare solutions. And maybe to make it a little bit more personal, because you can also see a picture with both of us. So in one of my previous roles, I was working for a genetic sequencing company working in the field of oncology. So in the end, it meant that the company I was working on was taking a sample of the tumor from a patient with cancer, was analyzing then the sample and was looking which therapies could work in treating this patient. And in this role, I learned not only Dr. Murtaza as a dear fellow and very experienced physician, especially with a focus from his training in neurology, but also now over the years, it is really a dear friend. And with that, it's also a pleasure having this presentation together and presenting it to you. So beside being a trained physician, I know that Dr. Murtaza is also a music lover. So I had it's a privilege to also spend already several hours listening to traditional Pakistani music in his home in Singapore, and it's really a pleasure having Murtaza as a friend. And over to you, Murtaza.
Thanks, Klaus. So I can take it on from here. First of all, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I hope सब ठीक ठाक हैं and आप लोग enjoy कर रहे हैं अपना internship. I believe कि काफी सारे sessions हो चुके हैं and you've been entertained by a lot of concepts and topics from different perspectives on life. I have a little bit of a trivia to share with you as well, that I'm Murad Jamil's nephew, and for a long time when I grew up, I looked up to him, and at some point I also wanted to become an architect. So fate had another destiny for me. I ended up becoming a doctor. And in fact, I had to leave medicine to join the pharmaceutical industry, which I have been associated with 23 years. But this is not about me. I wanted to introduce Klaus Schuster, who is a very dear friend of mine. And while we collaborated on the gene sequencing product that he and I were collaborating on, which was actually trying to improve patient outcomes for patients with cancer, you would probably try to figure out during the course of the presentation that how important patient outcomes are collectively to both of us, even though we're not in the same industries anymore. He is in the hospital management industry and I'm in the pharmaceutical, which is basically responsible for developing treatments. Klaus and I became friends ever since and have shared varied interests, among which music was foremost. And Klaus, like Murad Jamil just mentioned, happens to be someone very humble with a very illustrious career, but happens to be an avid musician. He is a prolific pianist and, plays tunes from whether Debussy or Chopin or Mozart. Klaus is a treat whenever he's around. You would find it very odd that anytime he's been visiting Singapore, we never went out. We just hung at home to talk different things, listen to music. And we one day asked each other that why didn't we even ever once go out for dinner? So you can imagine that we would get so connected that we would forget about the environment around us. So Klaus happens to be a proud father of a son and a daughter who should be coming to Singapore soon, and I'm very excited to receive them and meet the family for the first time. Klaus is a global traveler. And apart from that, he was once a nephrologist as well. So very close to my field, I was a urologist and Klaus was a nephrologist. So basically, nephrology is the experts who treat kidney diseases, and urologists are basically surgeons who do the same area of work. So with that, Klaus, what are we going to talk about today? Okay, well, let's kick it off then. Over to you.
Okay, absolutely. So if you can come to the next slide, please. The next one. So
all right. Maybe I should ask you this question first.
Absolutely, right? Please.
Tell me, why did we call this healing architecture? Why not any other term? Why did we decide to give this presentation the title healing architecture? And who would it benefit?
And also already listening to the students, I think it was clearly mentioned that if it's about patients. And Dr. Murtaza already mentioned that we being physicians, but also now in our current roles, be it in the pharmaceutical industry, but also in hospital management, it's all about improving patient outcomes. But as you can see on this slide, and I think this is really important, when we talk about healing architecture, the focus is not only on the patients, but as we will also show a little bit later on, its architecture, as we all know, is also influencing or has consequences and is raising emotions for the staff but also for the relatives of the patients. So as always, and I think this is a general idea and a concept which is very important to Dr. Murtaza and myself, that when we talk about outcomes, it's not just about patients, but it's all human beings being involved in the process. And this is something, this is the first key message we want to convey to you.
So, Klaus, the next question would be that the concept that we're talking about, is this something new, or does it date back to some ancient times, or what? Who, was the founder or the pioneer of something like this?
So maybe we can give this question over to our students. What do you
Okay.
think? How long is this concept of, let's call it healing architecture, existing? What do you think? So what you see here is an ancient example for healing architecture. Do you have an idea who this concept, who developed this concept? Do you have any idea? What do you think? Yeah, Greeks and Romans, fully correct. So thank you very much. And what you see here is it's called an Asklepion. Asklepios is the god for healing in Greek mythology. And in the end, the idea is quite an ancient one. So this is more than 2,000 years old. And in the end, the Greeks and the Romans had with these Asclepions already healing centers in different locations. But what is common for all of them is that these, what we call Asclepios sanctuaries, in this case, it's the picture from the main location in Epidauros, which is now in Turkey. They are all set in really beautiful, tranquil locations. Sometimes there could be also the sound of water as it trickling streams, turtles past, garden with trees, scent of flowers and herbs. So it's really something which is taking care of different senses. And in the end, part of the healing ritual was also to take a bath and sleep in the healing space, also to keep your mind fresh, but also to help you with your dreams. So what we wanted to show you with this is really that this concept is a very ancient one, but over the years, of course, it has been developed. So once again, the start was around 2,000 years ago by Greek and Romans, but then, of course, was adapted throughout the years. So when we now talk about healing architecture, it's not something which was developed by Dr. Murtaza and herself, but this is really has a long and very strong tradition in many cultures, in many continents over the world. So with that, I once again hand over to Murtaza for the next example. So
So
Murtaza, you have to tell me, why do you take a picture from Hungary?
why? Because was Budapest has beautiful architecture. It was for some time under Roman Empire, and then it adopted a lot of Roman influences into its architecture. But then, as it evolved over time, it also brought in East European architectural designs as well. But one of the most fascinating places that I went to was the St. Gelert's bath, which is basically a open public bath designed to improve concentration, or for that matter relax you, or to make cognitive function, which means thinking more clear, because it was a environment that was controlled with different temperatures. Some of these baths, which are beautiful aesthetically, they were ornate. They While they were, there were people over there, but they were still so big enough that they ended up giving you a feeling of having your own private space. It allowed for a lot of reflection as well, and the entire ambience over there was very, very captivating. And what was really interesting was that there were several baths, all controlled at different temperatures. So there was a very cold bath, then there was a warmer room temperature bath, and then there were really some very hot baths as well. And I read about that the tactile responses, which means the responses of the skin and their ability to interpret temperatures, takes up the nerves, makes them more agile to be able to pick up temperature differences, which is basically a very important part of our defense mechanism also. Because sometimes when the nerves on the skin, slow down, they can not immediately react to temperature changes, which if they are very sudden and very impulsive, they can result in injury to the skin. And once injury to the skin takes place, it can result in small wounds, which can then become reasons for bacteria that exist outside our body to come into us and then compromise our immune system and then make us fall sick. So these baths were therefore therapeutic, and they, kind of rejuvenated the skin, and of course allowed you to have good mental well-being as well.
So Murtaza, what you just mentioned, talking about this bath in Hungary, and maybe to give a little bit of background how important these rituals and tradition is in Central Europe still nowadays. This is what we call spa.
Yep.
And spa is the Latin word for sana per aquam, so meaning health via using water. The finest examples of these old and traditional spa rituals in Budapest, in Hungary, which is apparently the sister city of Vienna, as Vienna and Budapest at this time, 150 years ago, was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So there's a lot of common buildings and rituals in both cities.
So Klaus, do you have any spas like this in Vienna? I don't remember one when I went to Vienna. All I remember is going to Schönbrunn and the Viennese horse riding school and the opera. So were there any baths? I never went to any.
Not old ones, but we have a very strong tradition in having spas in the countryside. So using artesic fountains, using warm water directly, these warm fountains, and to use it for therapeutical concepts. It's very, very strong tradition. But listening to you, and maybe with that coming to the next slide, listening to you, Dr. Murtaza, and then this is now a question to the students. When we talk about healing architecture, what do you think, which senses can be approached or should be approached if it's about healing architecture? What do you think?
What senses play a role in healing? You have special senses. Can you talk of any that you know of that can play a role in healing? All the senses. Very good. So Klaus, we have the foundation.
Exactly. And we will try to show you examples, but also give you a little bit of background how this works for the different senses.
Once again, showing that you're fully right, that it's about hearing, smelling, tasting, it's about the view and the vision, but also about tactile sensations, so it's about haptic elements as well. But bear with us, we will try to show you some of these examples.
So that the first sense, and this is the privilege I have to talk about, is about sound healing. And this is of utmost importance. When we talk about sound healing, and of course, this is really very close to my heart being a musician, maybe to give you a little bit of a medical background. So sound is the first sense which is developed being an embryo. So if a mother becomes pregnant with a child, the first sense the embryo has already in the womb of the mother is the hearing sense. And it's also, if someone is dying, it's the last sense going and fading away. So it's something which is very, very deep in our heart, in our senses embodied. And this is also the reason why we react to sound so in a very emotional way. Having said that, we can use, and if we think about healthcare facilities, most healthcare facilities in the end are there to care for patients. And patient is a person who needs something. And this is also a message I want to convey. A patient is not a client, because being a client, also you need something, but you can take maybe a different option. As a patient, you have a desire, you are in a need for a treatment to be taken care of. This is something where healthcare facilities are also treating patients who then have a lot of anxiety, who have stress, and with sound and with sound healing, there are very good examples that with good sound concepts, also putting the noise level down, for example, but this is something which can help if it's about physical and mental balance, if it's about also anxiety, calmness of the mind, relaxation. So there are a lot of elements which have to be acknowledged if it's about sound healing. And as always, there's an active and a passive part. Passive part meaning to make sure that the noise, there's noise reduction, the background noise is not too loud. And there's active sound healing, where then also playing music can be used as a accompanying concept for patients, or there's also a concept called differently in different cultures, which mainly is about music therapy. And why is this something where Dr. Murtaza and myself, we are both convinced that this is influential? Because if you listen to music, it's not just the sound, it's also about the vibes you get out of it. And if you play an instrument and if you can feel these vibes, this is something where it's about not just the hearing sense, but then it's also about the tactile elements and the vibes you can really feel on your body. So maybe
So,
coming, yeah, sorry.
for the sake of the audience, sorry for interjecting. Let's give them some names of some chemicals that would probably get expressed when they listen to good music. Do you recall any names that of chemicals in the body that come and play this and create this effect?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Very good. I heard the word dopamine. Did anybody say dopamine? Very good. Yes, dopamine. The other one is Klaus, something starting with an S. Very good. And then something starting with O. Very good. Very
And,
good.
and, and then there's also something starting with a C. It's cortisol.
And,
Cortisol, the stress hormone.
but maybe you should ask Klaus the question: if cortisol is expressed by music, what effect would it have on the body?
No, it's the other way around. So it's down regulated. So if you have good music, you can really down regulate the cortisol level, and this is, for example, used in intensive care treatments. So music therapy, and maybe we can go to the next slide showing a little bit of evidence for that.
Klaus,
Please.
another leading question. So now, if somebody is listening to acid rock or punk jazz, or, punk rock or whatever, right? What would be the odds that the cortisol would go up, or would it get down regulated?
It honestly, it depends on the individual if you like the music or not.
All right, so it's about individual preferences. Okay, all
But
right.
that's also something which we have to acknowledge, because in medicine we are talking now much more about personalized, individualized treatments. And this is the same if it's about for senses. It's the same for music. It's the same for colors. Of course, there are certain trends that you say, okay, this rhythm, this kind of music normally is relaxing people, but as always, it's up to the individual. and this is something something to acknowledge as well. And as just mentioned, so Dr. Murtaza before was talking about spa, where it's about water, but of course there's also sulfuric fountains where you use sulfur also as a treatment concept. But now coming back to music therapy and to sound healing, as you can see here, we have put in some examples. If it's about the effect of music as a non-pharmacological intervention in intensive care units, and this is really though there are some emissions or patients needing intensive care, raising their awareness and really supporting their arousal if they have a coma. On the other hand, as we know, music is affecting anxiety levels. That's the reason why I mentioned cortisol before. But also using, for example, a functional MRT, one can see that the different genres of music also are creating different brain waves. So in the end, but of course, it's not something where there's a promise. There is a little bit of evidence that listening to classical music can also enhance brain activity. Please be sure that doesn't mean that you're then more intelligent, but at least it can raise your activity. Right, Murtaza? So at least this is my understanding of reading the literature.
Klaus mentioned something important. We are now in the domains of something called as pharmacogenomics. Pharmacogenomics basically tell us that every individual is very different from the other when they experience the same thing, all right? Some may like it at a certain sound level. I mean, this principle applies to medicines also. Some may like it on higher doses, some may need lower doses, some may need even lower doses. Just like when you are in a group of people, you're listening to the same song and there will maybe a little bit of an argument ke yaar volume ucha karo. Dagda kehega nahi, the volume is already loud enough, please don't raise it anymore, right? Those are individual preferences towards the same effect, and that's why we are different. And perhaps, like Klaus was mentioning, although cortisol is considered to be somewhat of a bad, it's dubbed as a bad hormone because it is directly responsible for increasing blood pressure, which is there's nothing wrong with it, because when you get up in the morning, the first thing that wakes you up is actually high cortisol levels. They get you the adrenaline rush, they get you the blood flow to get up and get out of the bed. So it's good, but only the problem is that when it gets secreted too excessively and has chronic effects is when the problems arise. So in summary, none of the chemicals in the body are bad. They're only bad when they become extremist. All right, they get exaggerated in their effects, or for that matter, the counter hormone for them has become deficient, or the organs that create it stop working. So as a result, the imbalance arises, and that is why we all discern things differently, even if we are listening to the same thing. Klaus, does that summarize well?
Absolutely, that was brilliant.
All right. So what's next? What's the next form of therapy?
So I would jump to the smelling, to the olfactorial sensations. And once again, smelling is something very on an individual level if it's about the olfactorial sensations. But we can see, and this is also used in healthcare facilities, called aromatherapy, because some studies indicate that there can be a benefit when inhaling these kinds of aromas. Because in the end, if you look at just how this is done, these molecules in essential oils can travel from the olfactory nerves in the nose directly to the brain. So it's very near to the brain, and is especially impacting the amygdala, which is the emotional center of the brain. So this is often used also, for example, this is also a concept which is not only used in healthcare facilities, but also if you go in shops, if you go in hotels, you can find and see that some of the bigger hotel groups have the same smelling and the same scent in all the hotels. They also have some kind of memory. And as always, of course, then it's up to you if you like it or not. Shops are working with the same concept. And it's the same here in smelling, that we see that this can affect levels of anxiety, depression, but also nausea or insomnia, which means not sleeping very well, but can also affect your appetite. But maybe, Murtaza, you can also give some examples of modern aromatherapy concepts.
Klaus, you bring us to a good juncture, actually. I was going to ask you a question. Chemotherapy,
Yeah.
can switch off nose in a lot of patients, right? And so, since you've dealt in this field, you may recall many patients who complain about, bad smells when actually they don't exist. And as a result, they start becoming nauseous, or they start to vomit even when they complain that there is a certain smell in the atmosphere. It is not perceivable to others, but except to them. Do you think aromatherapy could be something that could help such patients?
Absolutely, absolutely. Of course, as always, you have to be very cautious, as if you really use it on a broader level, not on an individual level, but use it as a scent in a room, on the floor, that one individual is acting very positively, whereas maybe for another one, it's not what he or she likes. But on an individual level, or in a smaller room, it can also support these processes, because in the end it can give you some kind of positive connotation. All of us have these kind of memories linked with certain senses, so for certain scents. So for example, if it smells like a rose, you have this connotation with a nice flower, or if it's about lavender or peppermint. So there are different concepts, and I think we have to differentiate, especially for you being in the field of architecture, that when we talk about aromatherapy, we as being physicians are mainly talking about individual aromatherapy, whereas if it's about healing architecture, there are concepts we really use scents for the whole building to have a connotation which is once again especially working on the anxiety level and reducing these levels.
So let's go to the next slide and engage the audience. But by first telling them that, we chose were the seven frequently found essential, oils, which are derived from peppermint, eucalyptus, ginger, lavender, lemon, rosemary, and jasmine. One thing's very common about them when I was looking at the data for the effects that they can produce. Invariably, they could all collectively bring about the same effect, which was an anti-inflammatory effect, reduction in cortisol levels. I mean, so of course, we're not talking about reducing cortisol levels in individuals who are otherwise well, but we're talking about individuals who are unwell, and as a result, they are, anxious, and that anxiety can keep cortisol levels at a higher level than normal, and then induce maybe conditions like hypertension, and cortisol can also induce inflammation. So these herbs can then, if presented in an essential oil, and if they are made to make the rooms in which a patient stay more fragrant, then that can have a therapeutic effect by providing an anti-inflammatory effect, reducing cortisol levels, or increasing serotonin and dopamine, like you mentioned earlier. And all these things collectively then either improve sleep or also reduce blood pressure. So, if, let's say the question for the audience now is, or tell me that if you ever went to, I mean, what did in your last visit to any hospital, did you smell the environment with any of these fragrances? Okay. So there's an unmet need that you can address through your designs. And by the way, these oils are not very expensive. I can tell you, if you can take out lemon and cut it into half and put cloves in it and put it over a heating element, it will exude aroma that can immediately, saturate your room. So there are various tricks and ways to, achieve good aromatherapy cost effectively. Klaus, do you have any recipes of your own?
So I just wanted to mention, so I have no recipes, but I think dealing with aromatherapy is a very cheap way of improving the atmosphere in a healthcare facility. Because just imagine if you go in traditional hospitals, and I please believe me, there is not really a big difference between your countries in Europe, in Latin America. In the end, the smell in a hospital is often a very typical smell if it's about disinfectants, but also about, of course, let's call it human fluids. And this is, of course, not very pleasant. On the other way, especially in waiting areas, using these kind of concepts can really help a lot, and it's very cheap. So this is something where we want we want you to keep that in mind, that especially in public areas and healthcare facilities, using these kind of elements can improve the atmosphere quite a lot, and is very, very cheap.
So, Klaus, you know what? That makes me recall a very interesting encounter I had with such an environment. You remember the Ramati Bodhi Hospital in Bangkok? Yeah. Now, Ramati Bodhi Hospital is, a government hospital, so don't expect it to be like Al Khan University Hospital or Sheikh Zayed Hospital or any other big hospital that is privately owned. So it's basically run on government funds. So they are also very frugal in how they administer the hospital. But I remember going to the oncology department once to meet a key opinion leader, Klaus. And I remember that I partially went through the waiting area, and the waiting area had a lot of lemongrass pots over there. And while there were lemongrass pots over there, I also saw a ensemble of 4 musicians playing traditional Thai instrumental tunes. And I was, I actually forgot that I had a meeting with this key opinion leader because I just got so captivated by that environment. And I started observing the patients just to see the effect of those two combinations, the sound and the smell, on them. And, they all looked at peace, considering that they were all cancer patients there to have their follow-up, but they all seem to be in element of comfort, in an element of, reconciliation. And I thought that those two combinations were working very well.
So, and I think this is once again, a very nice example showing the power of using and combining these different elements. And maybe when we talk about aromatherapy, which is quite a simple one, maybe we can come to the next one. Please, the next slide, which is using hues and colors. And I think this is apparently much more than if it's about me, if it's about using colors. But once again, we want to make sure that we remind you that colors is something, and this is a widely used concept, be it in airplanes, be it in hotel shops, etc. But also in healthcare facilities, where quite easily and without heavy investment, colors can influence the atmosphere. So maybe to give you a little bit of background, this was already shown in the 19th century, described by Goethe, which is a German writer. But he was also doing a lot of science, and he presented it in his theory of colors, where he linked color categories to emotional respondings. And this is something where nowadays we know much more, that, for example, blue can be very helpful if it's about trust, confidence, but also about security and purpose. So we have also put down at the bottom a clinical study showing that participants responded to blue with reported greater mental alertness, the meaning being more aware and reacting quicker. So this is once again an example where using colors to also influence the sense here can work pretty well. But now maybe coming with a question to you, Murtaza. So when we talk about colors, of course, colors can be also linked with pictures. So pictures have colors. What is your preference if it's about going to a healthcare facilities? Which kind of pictures would you like to see?
So, Klaus, while I think about that question first, I want to ask you what is another parable for detecting colors in human beings per se. You recall any corporate trainings where they tell you about your insight colors?
Insight colors? No.
Yeah. So there is a drill that the human resource departments sometimes run on leadership teams to see how the entire team is in terms of the color palette. And because they don't want the dominance of one color or on another, so they try to see run an insight test on every individual. It's a series of questions that you have to answer, and then it helps you determine what color you are.
Okay, yeah.
You remember now? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I remember now.
the objective of that is to create harmony of colors across individuals. So you have a good balance of each color, and each color is complementing to the other also, so that the strengths of one color can be the strengths for another color that doesn't have those traits, right? So for example, if somebody is red, they are going to be more action driven, they're passionate, they exude a lot of energy, they are most often in an excited state, or they get excited by things that move fast or bring in high energy. But the opposite of that are people like blues and the greens, which are much more sedate, much more relaxed. They are more harmonious. They are, like more quiet. They're more, in sync with nature. But when you look at them, both these energies are quiet from time to time, because we live in a situational world. We can't always just need blues and the greens, or for that matter, go on to be red. Anyway, so people who tend to be in the purple blue aura, they seem to be more analytical. They're a little introverted also. The yellows and the oranges are more extroverted. The blues and the greens are more empathetic. They are, more, they care about people a lot. So you would find HR roles, like the heads of HR, most often in the green and the blue areas.
So I was just elaborating that the second example at the bottom is something where we use surfaces for tactile elements. And for example, if you look at this pathway, you will see different surfaces, one with concrete, one with wood, one with stone. And we know that these different services are very important in the rehabilitation process. So in bringing people back to life for many indications. So for example, in neurology, where it's about after a stroke, you have to learn once again walking on different surfaces in a stable way. Or also in traumatology, you can prevent diseases. So for example, if you have lower back pain, so a discus perfusion, also preventing diseases, walking bare feet, for example, on different surfaces is something which can add a lot of benefit. And we use this concept of different surfaces in our treatment concepts in rehabilitation quite a lot. So just giving you some of the ideas. So in the interest of time, so that we also make sure that we can convey all of our messages, I hand over to Murtaza, because Murtaza, I think we have been talking a lot, but we also want to show that what we talk about is not just
Let's show them the evidence.
but showing some of the evidence.
Yeah. So, we just talked about, touch, nose, skin, eyes, and, there's one thing that we haven't talked about, but it may not be relevant because it's beyond our realm right now, which is basically the tongue, which is also part of the special sense. But let's put everything together over here. So in this vector, Venn diagram, you have the body senses on one side, and you have the healing structures, basically, which is the architectural design, and then the use of space that you combine with to create something called as emotional regulation. All right, there's sub elements to it because you want to create a sensory experience by combining body senses and space. You want to put space and combine with healing structures to guide spatial development, or for that matter, you want to combine healing structures with body senses to create an emotional atmosphere. And when you get all these 3 or 4 different effects and combine them together, you achieve something called as emotional regulation, which is very, very important for managing or making patient outcomes better. Now, this will also give you a little perspective on what are some design principles and then what parameters come into play when you go into discussing those design parameters. I will not go into the details of it, but I thought that this would be relevant for you to contextualize this Venn diagram with the approach that has been presented over there, and it's self-explanatory. You can read it at your own leisure. If you go to the next slide, I wanted to share with you a very interesting study that I came across. Now, this was clearly out of my domains because I'd never gone into a journal on buildings, and found something that was more closer to my heart. Klaus and I were discussing that what can we do for the audience that can make them connect with the science of architecture, which is creating effects on human body. And I found a brilliant paper which was a meta-analysis. Now, meta-analysis is basically a pooled analysis of all the studies that are similar in their design and in their outcome to detect one effect or 2 effects or 3 effects. In the case here, they did a meta-analysis for all the studies that were designed to see that if a architectural design was intervened, then what effect would it have on reducing pain, or for that matter, reducing inflammation, or for that matter, reducing stress, or for that matter, reducing fear. And we found this brilliant paper that showed us interventions, such as, for example, you would see the study design. They say that in the column study design, they read everything is experimental. In the first half, they would show the author's name. They would, in the setting, tell you about where the experiment took place. In the participant section, they would tell you something about who these patients were. And then the study design tells you that this is experimental. And the interventional column exactly means that what was the hypothesis. So hypothesis in the first study, which is marked green, was to bring in indoor plants and then see what effects does it have on patients. And when they made that architectural intervention by bringing in indoor plants, they saw that the patient's pain intensity went down. The need for taking painkillers also went down, which meant that this intervention had shown positive effects. This was further corroborated by another design, another study that actually brought in pictures of nature, and that too resulted in reduction of pain.
And
Similarly, yeah.
Murtaza, let me ask you a question because I think then it's maybe also a little bit easier to understand when we look at these studies and we talk about p-values. So, for example, in pain reduction, what does it mean? Because in the end, it's nice to say, okay, I have a result, but how impactful is it?
It's a very important question, Klaus, because when the studies are designed, the most important part of the design is actually how you analyze them statistically. And the one purpose of statistical analysis is to increase the body of evidence, to make the evidence more convincing. And that is based on some principles, which also requires how many people are you going to interview in a trial, or how many people are you going to try the product on. So basically what it means is the larger the sample sizes, the greater the body of evidence, the more conviction it brings, or for that matter, the statistical value becomes stronger. So if it comes to interpreting statistical values over here, now what would you denote out of a p 0.045? Now 0.05 is supposed to be a cutoff value, which means that the evidence is trending towards significance. All right. If the number drops to 0.04, 0.03, 0.02, 0.01, by the time you get to 0.01, the evidence is significantly strong, and they say that the risk of interpreting it with bias or reducing false positive effects is much lower, and the evidence is convincing. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. So, for example, if you look in the middle column, you see that there is a study, if it's about what is the effect of music for surgical patients, and it's quite a nice number with 100 patients or 100,
That's a highly
yeah,
significant statistical value.
which is really significant and showing the evidence or a good evidence that music can have a very positive effect if it's about how much pain.
I would not go into the details of it, but the objective of these studies was to highlight the impact of the four elements that we discussed: music, which is sound, visuals, which is basically plant and nature, and of course, lighting as well. And then, of course, important thing is how you design the space. For example, if you show too much hospital equipment, that can increase fear, or for that matter, if you hide them or make the hospital environment decluttered, and you create open spaces and a feeling of well ventilated environments, that can also reduce stress, as you can see in some of the studies. Klaus, what is the value of evidence such as this when it comes to designing hospitals?
So that the value is that, as we can see, there is good evidence that integrating these concepts in modern healthcare planning makes sense. Makes sense for the patients, but here we are only seeing the effects on the patients, but we know that there is also an effect on the staff. And as we all know, in healthcare, there is staff scarcity in many countries, and having concepts and healthcare facilities, which is also giving comfort, at least a little bit, also to the staff working in such difficult environments, is something which, for me, running hospitals and running healthcare facilities, something which is extremely important. And therefore, and I come to it a little bit later, using these concepts to attract people to our facilities, be it patients, but also staff, is something also economically very important.
An important question from the relevance of this evidence. What do you think an architect who's designing an hospital and is supposed to make a presentation and wants his concept to carry forward without much objection or challenges, do you think this would be a good way for an architect to take such evidence to infuse confidence and trust in the the sponsors of the project?
So I think some at least one or two examples showing that integrating this concept is not just fancy and nice to look at, but really has an impact on the patients and on the outcomes. So, and as always, explaining the why is something which is always, I think, very helpful in a presentation.
All right, so we can go to the next slide, which is a little more extension of the evidence. And you would see a list of all these studies. These are the studies that were basically done to prove hypothesis that a certain design would achieve a certain patient outcome. I will not go into the details of it. This is self-explanatory. Please go have a read, and you will figure out the value of the evidence that is piled up over here. But the one message that comes out of this is that the European Union recognizes architecture as a vital cultural and life component, particularly in healthcare, where it transcends mere aesthetics to foster environments conducive to health, healing and well-being. Um, Klaus, how do you adopt such a guidance that comes from European Union? What does it tell you, and how are you implementing that in your hospital management?
So, and then this brings me, thank you very much for this transition. This brings me to the next slide, because the EU, as you know, the European Union is not existing for such a long time. So they also had to learn, and maybe we can jump to the next slide, please. Because if we look at the typical requirements for 20th century hospital planning concept, so hospital planning done 30, 40, 50 years ago, this was merely focusing on diseases and process optimization, which of course is an very important, or these are important elements, because in the end it's healthcare facilities. But it's not just about process optimization. All this evidence which Murtaza showed to you, and also look at this EU directive or this EU guideline for hospital planning, I think the focus has changed, because in the 70s, 80s of the 20th century, it was about profit optimization. It was about focusing on diseases and process optimization. Whereas nowadays, once again, it's in the or it's for the benefit for patients, but also for the relatives and for the staff. Modern trends now refocus on the patient, focus on the individual, because in the end, this is what it's all about. It's about the patient and it's about the care. And please, and this is very, very important for me, we are not just talking about processes, we are talking about individuals, we are talking about human beings. So in the end, what also the European Union tried to say is really having the patient in the focus and not just the disease. Moving from static processes to really making sure that we acknowledge that there is individual need on one hand, but on the other hand, there's a societal need. If it's about personalized care, and this is something you have to balance. So modern concepts for hospitals include smart hospital concepts, modular and flexible designs, patient-centric ways, telehealth integration, and then, and you read it here, sustainable and healing environments. So something we are talking here about. So collaborative spaces as well, but also then using advanced data analytics. But as you can see, healing environments is one of several elements to have a modern healthcare planning concept successfully established. And this is something which strikes really the chord for me, because in the end, and Murtaza was talking about it, we are here to improve outcomes. When we say we have a focus on the patient, it's on two aspects. And one, of course, is outcome, and the other one is satisfaction. And maybe it's now a little bit provocative, but the medical outcome is not always the same as individual and subjective patient satisfaction. And therefore, for me, running hospitals where we earn our money with running hospitals and treating patients, and I think this is regardless of the nature of the healthcare system, in the end, it's about satisfaction and outcomes, because occupancy and the number of patients being dealt in a hospital is in the end of utmost importance for the economical success. And if you just think a little bit and listen to your heart, what is in the end influencing occupancy? In the end, it's patient satisfaction. And when we speak about patient satisfaction, it's infrastructure, it's about colors being used, sound, it's food and beverage. In the end, it's the subjective perception of care. But then, of course, it's also word of mouth and motivated staff. But when we speak about what do you perceive as your individual subjective perception of a healthcare facilities, this is creating your level of satisfaction. But honestly speaking, that's the same if you go to a restaurant. In the end, you're also maybe deciding a restaurant because you like it. And when you say you like it, it's about the food, it's about the atmosphere, it's about the friendliness and hospitality of the waiters and of the staff. So this is something which you perceive. And we have to acknowledge that the same concept is, at least to some extent, true for healthcare facilities, which where in the end, occupancy and high patient satisfaction is integrating healing environment to increase and improve patient outcomes, but also increase patient satisfaction is why we include these concepts into our buildings as well.
Klaus, if you just allow me, I just want to take a minute to help the audience over here connect with a very old hospital that exactly captured all these things in Pakistan. Back in the Clifton area, there was a hospital that introduced these concepts. I'm talking about 1980s, and it was called as the Mideast Hospital. And the Mideast Hospital had a area where they had brought in animals as well. And it was such a treat, not just for the patients who would go into the cafeteria and watch those animals, but even for outsiders. Usually nobody wants to go to a hospital, but there was one hospital even attendants wanted to go to just feel elevated and uplifted. It was such a good execution of this concept as early as 1980s. That hospital does not exist anymore. In fact, later on, it completely was totally mismanaged and lost all its great appeal and promise that it had at the start until the other hospital came up. But I don't know, the generation sitting over here would not recall that name nor the hospital, but I'm sure Murad and others from our generation would definitely have a good recall about Mideast Hospital, which was once upon a time.
Thank you very much, Murtaza,
Yep.
what we have discussed so far. So a modern concept of healing architecture. So I think, as we could show, the principle started already 2,000 years ago in the times of the Greek and the Romans. But the same 7 main parameters are orientation. So meaning really to have a concept where it's clear for patients where to go. This is of special and really utmost importance, because if you think about elderly people, for example, for them it can be, especially in particular, if they have a lot of stress, it can be quite difficult to orientate themselves. So orientation is one thing. The next thing is really if it's about using these different sensational experiences, be it in smelling sensations, be it in background noise, but also adding in the architecture place to have some kind of privacy. What we also include, but this, at least in Austria, this is something by law, that we call it, so you could say PowerPoints. So it could be a cathedral, it could be a temple. What we do in Austria, we have a multidisciplinary, multi-religious unit where someone can meditate, can pray, because we are fully convinced that acknowledging all different types of cultures and religions, we have to put in such places also in our healthcare facilities. Something which is also important, and we can see that is giving view and foresight. There is a big difference if there's a wall in front of your eyes, or at least you have the perception that you can look outside and have some kind of landscape which you see. And then, this is something where we also know from psychology that using this kind of human measures, if it's about relations between height and length, can be very, very important. So maybe to give you a little bit of the theory here, Luksch et al. Is calling that the healing 7. So if you look at these parameters and if these terminology, you can find much more data. And just wrapping it up from my side before handing back to Murtaza, let me on the next slide just show you some examples how this could work or how this is working. You see here examples of healing architecture in Western Europe. The picture at the top is a pediatric oncology ward. We're using different colors, different haptical elements, but also, as you can see, foresight and some kind of visionary view is creating this atmosphere. What I just wanted to include here is also bringing in some kind or some elements of nature into healing environment. And I just wanted to be sure that when we talk about healing architecture, you will also find this concept of biophilic design. And I think for Murtaza and myself, it's important to have this differentiation that biophilic is a part of healing architecture, because biophilic means trying to bring as much nature into the building as possible, whereas in healing architecture, this is one element, but healing architecture has a much more holistic approach, focusing on humans and their needs. And with that, and giving you also a very precise example from your region, I give back to Murtaza.
So, along with biophilic designs, more and more hospitals are actually trying to bring in their own culture into the design principles. You would see certain hospitals over here that are trying to actually bring in their own architectural heritage. So there's this one hospital from Qatar, which is, trying to depict a little bit of sand dunes or perhaps sails that, represent the Middle Eastern spice trade when they were, mooring around in the boats, taking spices from one locale to another. The one below is a hospital from Thailand, which is bringing into, the pagoda, the unique Thai architectural styles into the facade of the hospital. And you would see, another hospital over here, which is purely designed on the principles of biophilic hospitals, which is the An Theng Phong Hospital in Singapore, which is actually being surrounded by an equatorial forest where patients can actually go and relax outside when they are allowed to, and actually become part of the nature, because it's full of birds and wildlife as well, which can be very, very captivating for the patients. So these are, up and running hospitals. They're driving a lot of attention, and people who come out, even if their illness continues to remain chronic but is stable, they leave these hospitals with great memories, and that then uplifts them or even helps them. In medical science, there's a saying that half the disease is in the mind, and if the mind can be healed, the rest of the disease can be alleviated significantly. So it's at this point, I would like to conclude by saying that if we begin with captivating the mind and healing it, I think the next outcome of achieving better patient outcomes would follow suit. So, Klaus, with that, you want to give any closing remarks?
Thank you very much, Murtaza. So the only thing I want to add is saying thank you to all of you for listening to us. As always, for me, it was also a big learning curve looking into the data and preparing for the presentation together with Murtaza. And just wrapping it up in one sentence, the key message we want to deliver to you is, if it's about healing architecture, it's not just for patient, but it's for the staff and relatives as well. Please bear in mind that it's not about somatic status, but when we talk about health, it's really this combination of the somatic status, but also mental health. And as always, and I think maybe you have perceived that as well, that Murtaza and myself always try to be very holistic. So not just focus on one of the elements of healing architecture, but really try to include and integrate as much as possible into your concepts. And with that, I hand back and say, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's highly appreciated.
I would like to wish all the audience over here good luck and successful journey ahead in your careers. May it be very, very enriching for you to not just build things, but innovate and create them and create your put your signatures on them the way you think it best fits your environments where you bring all these effects. And then rise and shine, make name for Pakistan, and get it the recognition that it deserves.
All the best. Thank you very much.
Very much. Pakistan Zindabad.